So we're going to start today by talking about Queen Elizabeth. Yesterday, or in the last video that you would have watched, that you would have seen or talked about the Reformation, the reaction to it from Martin Luther or to Martin Luther, and then you would have talked about King Henry VIII and his 6 wives, and why did he need to go through 6 wives? What was his goal? What was the purpose? Does anybody remember? No, we didn't watch the video. Ian? Yeah, what kind of kid? A boy. He needed a male heir. Okay. So he wanted to have a male heir, and so that's what he did. And eventually that male heir did come to the throne in 1547. He reigned for about 6 years, and then he died, and King Henry VIII's first daughter, Mary, came to the throne, and she actually took what King Henry had done and threw it all in the garbage. She said, "Oh, you broke from the Catholic Church? We don't care about that. We're going back to Catholic. We're going back to Catholicism, and we're going to practice that." And she killed a lot of Protestants. That's how she got her nickname. Anybody want to guess her nickname? Bloody Mary. You've probably heard of her before. You've at least said the name before, you screaming into your mirror, right? You know, that little game that everybody plays. She didn't last either. She was overthrown, and eventually Queen Elizabeth came to the throne. She was the daughter of Henry VIII, that should say 8, and Anne Boleyn. And this is all in your notes there from Monday and Tuesday. So if you don't have that, it should be in your Google Drive. And then you also need the second part. It's on Schoology under September 10th. But the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn comes to the throne. She's Queen Elizabeth I. And she takes what was good from Catholicism and good from the Protestants and combines them and creates what is called the Anglican Church. She tried to please both parties. There were still many Catholics in England, and there were people that were going against Catholicism, so she wanted to appeal to both. How did she do this? Well, she allowed priests to have families. Remember, in the very beginning, priests were having families and they weren't allowed to. Well, in the Anglican Church, they were. She also kept things like the ornateness of the Catholic Church, the robes that they would have worn, or the way that their services were conducted. So Elizabeth makes the Anglican Church the official church of England. Of course, the king and queen, or just the queen at this point, was the head of the church, and they had all power. And there's a couple different reasons that you would want to break from the Catholic Church. One, like King Henry, he could annul his marriages, and he was the head of it. Power would be one, because the person that was in control of the church during these times would have been very powerful. And land. The church had a lot of land, and if you have a lot of land, you've got a lot of money. And so there was a lot of different reasons to do this. Elizabeth would be one of the better rulers of her time. She would usher in what would be called the Elizabethan age, that you'll learn about a little bit later on. And she was able to kind of create religious peace in England for a time. And so this religious peace would not be perfect. There would still be fighting. There were still Catholics that wanted to get rid of the Protestants and Protestants that wanted to get rid of the Catholics. But for the most part, it was fairly civil in England after this point in time. But it completes that break that King Henry VIII started in England from the Catholic Church. They would not go back to any type of Catholicism after this point. The church would remain Anglican. And most of our churches in the United States are based off this Anglican church because obviously most of our ancestors come from England. Okay? Any questions there? It kind of completes the King Henry story. Now, when we talked about the Renaissance, we talked about how when ideas spread, what happens to them? They get changed, right? So Luther was kind of the first influencer of the world because he was influencing people all over the place. And John Calvin was one of them. John Calvin was 8 years old when the 95 Theses were posted on the church doors. He's 8. So he grew up during the Reformation. In it, he kind of took those ideas and changed them. His ideas hit the church with what we would call a POW. 3 ideas, P-O-W, that would hit the church with a POW. First one was predestination. He believed in predestination. He believed that God chooses who's going to heaven before they're born, when they're born, and you don't have to do good works to get there. So that's actually going to kind of contradict each other in just a minute. But you don't have to do good works to gain salvation. You already have it if you were chosen. The second one, our moral lives reveal if we were chosen by God or if we go to heaven or not. And so the idea there of our moral lives kind of show whether or not we were chosen. And then lastly, our work ethic. Our work ethic, or our righteous life that you live, honors God. And so the acronym of PAL, predestination, our moral lives, and work ethic, is what he kind of wanted to see in his religion that he would have. It was based off of Luther's ideas, but it was vastly different. It changed. But it was also different than the Catholic Church. It was still a break from the Catholic Church, but it was also a break from Luther's ideas. Is anybody still typing? Still typing? Good? Okay. So again, just to reiterate, predestination is salvation through predestination, meaning that you are going to be saved. He believed people were going to go to heaven, but he believed they didn't have really a choice in the matter, that if they were good, if you were good, you were going there. And he believed that your actions would show it. So like if Gage was a good person, he was probably a part of the elect and that he's going to heaven. But if Gage was a murderer, which he is on the football field, that's what he does, right? He's a savage. But in reality, if he was a murderer, then he was probably not chosen to go into heaven. That's just part of the way that predestination works. And our lives show it. So at birth, it was decided whether you were going there or not. And if you want to get into a debate with some religious people, talk about predestination, because that's a tough one. Because God's all-knowing, right? So God knows what you're going to do. But if God knows what you do, you have choice. A lot of people believe you have choice. But if you believe you have choice, then do you have predestination? That's where you get, like I said, it starts whoop-whoop-woo. Goes crazy. And whoop-whoop-woo sounds really good on the YouTube channel, so I like to say it. But you will be. If you talk loud enough, you got to answer some questions. But that's John Calvin. So his ideas kind of start picking up. Well, they kind of call him. They don't call him because they didn't have phones back then, but they sent a letter. And in Switzerland, they wanted him to come lead the city there in Geneva. So in Geneva, about 20,000 people have this yearning for Calvinist ideas. And so they get Calvin to come lead their city. And they have a unique idea in Geneva where the government is controlled by religious leaders. We call that a theocracy, where the government is run by the religious leaders, the priest of the town. And so Calvin runs this city very, very uniquely and very strictly. You could not wear bright clothing. You could not play card games. You could not miss religious services, among other things that you couldn't do. If you did those things, you would be punished. You would be banished from the community. You could be excommunicated from the church. Or lastly, and usually finally, you could be executed. So you wear a bright shirt to church, you might have your head cut off. That's the way they believed. And as bad as that may sound to you all, this model of religion with government became the model of many cities throughout Europe. Many people latched onto this idea of Calvinism. The French called it, they were called Huguenots. In other places, they were called other things. But Calvinists grew huge during this time. And just like anything else, as something grows and grows, it starts to influence more people. And then we're going to see more offshoots of this Protestant church. So we saw offshoots of Lutheranism. Now we're going to see offshoots of Calvinism. And John Knox, he goes and visits Calvin in Geneva. And he kind of likes what he sees. Sees the city and how it's run. And he thinks we can do that too. So he takes the ideas back to Scotland, where he was from, and they change it again. Just a little bit different from what he was, maybe less strict. And the government wasn't controlled by the religious leaders, but the church was controlled by a council of elders that they called presbyters. Has anybody seen a Presbyterian church? Yeah, we have a lot of them here. That's where the basis of it is from, is John Knox in Scotland. Do what? Yeah, Trinity, yeah, Presbyterian. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of them. And so many people would be Presbyterians. And like in my church today, we have elders. So elders are something that kind of stuck with a lot of different offshoots of these religions. But he was influenced by Calvin, and then he changed it a little bit more. But each time, it changes how the church is governed. Another group would be the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists were known for baptizing again. Because, see, most people during this time would have been baptized at birth. But they didn't believe in that. And most of it would have been baptized at birth. But they believed only people who were old enough to decide to be Christians should be baptized. Well, most of you probably recognize that as a modern day religious idea, that you get baptized when you decide, not when you're a baby. If you're Catholic, then you probably don't do that. But, in the religion that I'm in, that's how it works. And so, not getting into a right or wrong with religion, but that's how the Anabaptists believe. Now, the Lutherans and the Calvinists still believed in baptism at birth, and so did the Catholics. So how do you think the Anabaptists were treated throughout Europe? Bad. As you can see in the picture, that's them burning them at the stake. They were persecuted across Europe because both groups, Protestants and Catholics, looked at the Anabaptists as radicals, as crazy people, as zealots that were completely different. And so they both persecuted them. They both didn't like them. And so we see Christianity. You have Catholics. That was Christianity before the Reformation. Remember that. After the Reformation began, you had the Protestants, the people that were protesting against the Catholic Church. And then you had Lutherans. That wasn't the first goal of Luther, but eventually that's what it became when he noticed that the Catholic Church wasn't going to listen. And then Luther's ideas were split into Calvin and Calvinism. And then Calvinist ideas were split into Puritan ideas and Huguenots and Anabaptists and Presbyterians and on and on and on. The point of this is that the Reformation started what we know of as modern religion in terms of how we see it. Because you might be a Baptist and I might be a Church of Christ and you might be a Catholic and the next might be a Presbyterian or a Methodist or on and on and on. We have many different religions. But also the fact that who was in charge of the religions changed. Because access to religion became to the people. We started to read the Bible. We started to access the ideas of the Bible, and we started to teach ourselves what it meant to be religious instead of, well, the priest tells us what we're supposed to do, or the Pope tells us what we're supposed to do, or the preacher tells us what we're supposed to do. That's what changed. So with all this, we haven't seen the Catholic Church change very much, right? They've kind of just sat it out and they've not changed. Well, what is happening if most people were Catholic and now it splits? What is happening to the members of the Catholic Church? Are they leaving or staying? They're leaving. And so you've got to fix some things so you don't lose all your members. And so on that second document, if you go back to Schoology and click that second document that says the second part of your notes, it'll pull up another sheet. It should make you make a copy of it. It's my fault. I didn't give you all of the notes. I didn't realize I didn't until yesterday. So I went in and fixed that, but now you have access to it. And they had their own movement called the Catholic Reformation that would reform the Catholic Church from within to keep loyal members. So there were still plenty of people that were Catholic, but they knew they needed to change some things to make sure that they were not going to lose all their members. Did you find it? No. Go back to school, did you? Go to September 10th. And then click that link right there. Mm-hmm. Did you get it? The one at the top? No, yeah, that one. Okay, did you get it? Yep. It's just like Catholic Reformation at the top. One of the leading reformers of this movement would have been Ignatius of Loyola. You've probably heard of different colleges that have that in front of their name. If you watch any kind of basketball and you know about Loyola Marymount, one of the schools at school. Yep, that's another one.
They were the people that had all the underdogs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With that old lady.
Yeah, with the nun. Yep. Mm-hmm. All of those schools can find their roots based off of Ignatius of Loyola, because he was a leading Catholic reformer and started a group called the Society of Jesus Religious Order, or what we call, because that's way too long to say and not fun, the Jesuits, which is way better to say. So we call them the Jesuits. And the Jesuits had some ideas of how to reform the Catholic Church. Now, this is where we take a step back and we go, what was the problems that the Catholic Church was dealing with that the Reformation happened because of? Well, one of them was the fact that the clergy or the church officials were not very smart, that they were uneducated. Most of them couldn't read. So what do? They start schools. And so, like I said, most of the schools that we know of as Catholic schools in this country, which there's a bunch, are viewed as being started during the Reformation, or getting their roots from there, because the Jesuits started schools to educate the clergy. Because if normal members could read the Bible better than your clergy is not needed. So you needed them to be educated. Secondly, their goal was to convert non-Christians. Now, this one doesn't really tie into what we're talking about at this moment, but it ties into what we're going to talk about next. Most people in Europe were Christians. Most had their beliefs. So if you're going to convert non-Christians, where are you going to find them? Are they going to be in Europe or somewhere else? Somewhere else. And you're going to have to explore to find them. So we're going to get an age of exploration where they're seeking to find non-Christians in other places, such as the Americas, Africa, Asia, other places like that. And then lastly, they wanted to stop the spread of the Protestant church. And that was important to them as well, because the Protestants were growing like crazy. They wanted to try to stop it. And so they did a lot of things that they shouldn't have to try to stop it. During this time, you had two popes that were considered reforming popes, Pope Paul the third and Pope Paul the fourth. Pope Paul III investigated church abuses such as indulgences. Remember, indulgences are what pushed Martin Luther over the top. And so that idea was abused during this time, and so they kind of put a check on indulgence selling. Also, he used the Inquisition to search out heresy. People that would have spoke out against the Catholic Church, they would have been tortured and made to recant of their beliefs. Yes, torture. Inquisition. I saw one where they hung the guy up in the middle of a room, and people just sat around at a table and had pikes or swords, and they just poked him. And they just kept poking him until he decided to say that he didn't believe the way he did. You want to do that? No, me neither. And then lastly, he called the Council of Trent, which was a series of meetings between 1545 to 1563. They didn't meet every day, and they didn't meet every one of those years. They had 3 separate meetings, 3 periods of time where they met from that time on. And they came up with some ideas that they were going to reform the church with, and we'll talk about that one in just a second. Pope Paul IV, he carried out the Council of Trent decrees. He created something called the Index of Forbidden Books. Sounds like a Harry Potter thing, right? Like the forbidden part of the library. What was that section called? Can't remember. Y'all aren't Harry Potter fans? Goodness, what's wrong with y'all? But the Index of Forbidden Books was created in 1559. It was a list of books that they couldn't read. It's kind of like your firewalls on your Chromebooks, right? Y'all don't like the firewalls because y'all can't go to certain websites and you can't do certain things. Same thing here, except they actually use real fire. It's not a firewall, like they burnt books. Any book that they disagreed with, they burned it, so you couldn't read it. So they used the real fire. And so, like I said, the Council of Trent, it was a Catholic meeting to discuss reforms. That's what it was. And it took place from 1545 to 1563. And in it, they came up with 4 major things that they wanted to get out to the rest of the Catholic members. The church's view of the Bible was the final authority. And if you think back to Luther's idea, he said the church's or the Bible's ideas were the final authority, or the Bible's words were the final authority to Christians. And they said, well, the Bible's important, but how we tell you what the Bible says is really important. Secondly, he said they said, faith and works were needed. Again, Luther said that faith was needed for salvation. They said, yeah, you need faith, but you also need works. You had to actually do something. Thirdly, the Bible and church traditions were equally important. That things that you did in the Catholic Church were important and that you needed to keep them. They weren't just miscellaneous traditions, but also the things that the Bible said you need to do as well. And lastly, one of the major problems, they said indulgences were okay, but they could not be abused. So the church stopped selling them. You could still get an indulgence, but you could not sell them for a certain price. Couldn't be abused anymore. So they changed themselves as well. So the Catholic Church had to stop losing members, so they had to adapt to those times as well. So there's not only the Protestant Reformation, but there's also the Catholic Reformation. The Protestant Reformation, of course, splinters off into many different directions, where the Catholic Reformation pretty much says all the same things that they were doing before, okay. They just had a long series of meetings, and that's how you can kind of compare and contrast those two ideas. But are there any questions about the Reformation and the notes that you have on the Reformation? Anything we need to go back over? Okay. Well, quickly, I'll talk about your assignment for today. If you go to Schoology and you click the link down at the bottom, it says use the link to access the cause and effect assignment. Today we learned about the Counter-Reformation, or what we call the Catholic Reformation. It is one and the same. And how it responded to the Protestant movement. Use the links and other internet sources to find causes of the Counter-Reformation or Catholic Reformation, and then describe the effects that happened due to those causes. Have at least one cause and one effect in each bubble, and remember, causes happen because effects, or happen before effects, not the other way around. So you can't have a cause, you can't talk about a cause that had an effect before it. Causes, then effects. Causes, then effects. And that'll make more sense when you look at this. If you click that link here, I'll ask you to make a copy. I'm not going to do it because I've already done it once. And it looks like this. This blue link here will take you to a website. It talks about the Counter-Reformation. You can read that there. And look for causes here and effects, because it may say some kind of cause like the 95 Theses. Caused that challenge, and the leaders, were frightened, all these different things. And then this other one was on the Council of Trent. If you click it should go there. It shouldn't have any problems. And it's a short little reading about what the Council of Trent not only was, but what each session was about. And you put a cause here, so you could put like the cause is, Luther's 95 Theses. And then you could put the effect of those things down here, so blah, blah, blah. If there are no questions, then y'all may begin. And, if you have any questions at home, then you need to email me and make sure that you're doing this. Again, you guys at home, your test is going to be Monday. There is no study guide. There's also no essay question this time. There will be in the future. And so you need to make sure that you study your notes from the Renaissance or the Reformation to make sure you have that information for your test. So make sure you study your graphic organizer or your guided notes for your test. Without anything else, I hope you have a great day.